Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your essential sources, notes, and questions and turn them into crystal clear knowledge.
That's right.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into one of the most culturally powerful narratives in history, the Nativity.
And for this deep dive, we were given a fascinating challenge. We have to compare the image of the Nativity that, exists in popular culture.
The one on every Christmas card.
Exactly that one. Compare that with the verifiable historical and archaeological consensus drawn from the ancient sources.
And what our stack of sources shows is this incredible tension. Tradition gives us a beautifully precise image, right? A date, a specific kind of building, a whole narrative. But when historians approach this, they have to rely on these fragmented political timelines and architectural evidence to piece together the facts.
And that's our mission here, to navigate that tension. We're looking for those aha moments hidden in the consensus about when Jesus was born, where he was born, and why the traditional date of December 25th is actually a much later symbolic adoption.
This isn't about challenging belief.
Not at all. It's about appreciating the fascinating journey of how history meets tradition. So let's start with the biggest puzzle of all. The calendar itself.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because it's the most fundamental confusion for anyone diving into this topic.
Right.
If the birth of Jesus is the pivotal moment that supposedly anchors the transition from BC to AD, why does virtually all mainstream scholarship place his birth years earlier, somewhere between, 6 BC and 4 BC?
It seems utterly counterintuitive, I know.
Yeah.
But the answer lies in historical anchoring. When historians look at the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, they aren't looking for calendar dates.
They can't. There aren't any.
Exactly. They're looking for a crucial historical marker that can be verified externally. And that marker is simple. Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great.
And Herod, unlike a religious event, has a very well-established political timeline. It's documented by multiple non-Christian sources.
Precisely. And the key to cracking this chronological mystery is turning to the highly respected Jewish historian Josephus.
Okay.
Josephus, in his comprehensive histories, meticulously confirms that Herod the Great died in 4 BC.
So if the Gospels are correct that Jesus was born under Herod's rule, then the birth must have occurred sometime before that 4 BC death date.
It has to have. That single external data point sets the boundary for the entire historical window.
That's the non-negotiable fact.
It really is.
Okay.
It's why the academic consensus settled on that 6 BC to 4 BC window. It shows the rigor of history. Historians rely on the verifiable political facts, even if it means contradicting the calendar itself.
So the very foundation of our dating system is, mathematically and chronologically off by at least 4 to 6 years. How did an error that big even happen?
Well, that brings us to the famous year zero problem and the monk responsible. Our current AD BC system wasn't formalized until the 6th century.
So 500 years after the event.
About 500 years later, yeah. It was established by a Roman monk and a calculator named Dionysius Exiguus.
What was his specific goal? He wasn't just, bored with the Roman dating system, was he?
No, not at all. Dionysius was trying to establish the precise date of Easter, which is tied to lunar cycles and required these highly complex chronological tables.
Right.
To calculate those future Easter dates accurately, he wanted to anchor his tables to the beginning of the Christian era, the moment of Christ's incarnation.
So he essentially sat down in the 500s AD, looked at whatever scattered records and chronologies he had, and tried to back-calculate the year of birth.
Precisely. And he made what scholars now agree was a substantial calculation error of several years.
Just a mistake.
A simple good faith mistake. Historians suggest the methods and source material available in the 6th century were just. They were inadequate for pinpointing a date 5 centuries earlier. We are essentially still using a calendar based on a mathematically flawed estimate.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you, the learner, trying to connect the dots. Not only was the starting point miscalculated, but Dionysius also operated without the concept of zero.
Yeah, that concept hadn't been fully integrated into Western European mathematics yet.
Think about that practical consequence.
It's huge. Because he lacked the placeholder of 0, he couldn't have a year 0. So the calendar had to jump directly from 1 BC to 1 AD.
Which isn't just a math quirk. It complicates all retroactive chronological analysis. It adds another layer of confusion to the already wrong starting date.
So we have an error of several years based on a 6th century calculation, compounded by a lack of a year 0.
It's a fascinating artifact of intellectual history. It just proves that even seemingly fixed timelines are products of their own time.
It teaches us to rely on the external, verifiable political facts, Herod's death, over the calendar's internal structure.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, now that we've confirmed when the birth likely occurred, let's shift our attention from the chronological mystery to the visual one, the where.
Okay.
Both Matthew and Luke agree on the locale, Bethlehem in Judea. But the setting, the architectural reality, that's where tradition really diverges from archaeology.
It absolutely does. I want you to just picture the traditional nativity scene. Almost universally in Western culture, we see Mary, Joseph, and the infant in a standalone, often wooden structure.
A barn. Or a stable.
A barn or stable, yeah. With open sides and a distinct roof. That is the visual we all carry in our collective memory.
Which, when you actually look at first-century Judean architecture, becomes highly unlikely.
Completely. Based on archaeological digs and studies of domestic architecture in the region, the typical Judean home of that period was, well, it wasn't a single-use dwelling. These homes were often built in two parts or levels.
Okay, so what does that look like?
The family lived on the upper, cleaner level. The ground level, which often had an earthen or stone floor, was reserved for storage, milling, and crucially sheltering valuable animals like donkeys and sheep.
Especially at night or during cold weather.
Exactly. So the idea isn't that they were locked out and banished to a separate structure out back.
Right, it's that the main living area of the relative's home was full.
It was full, and the only available secure space was the lower animal sheltering level of the house itself. It changes the dynamic from cold isolation to overcrowded intimacy.
And what about the caves? You hear about a cave.
Well, Bethlehem is built into limestone hills. So many dwellings were built adjacent to or even incorporated natural grottos or caves, which were easily adapted into stables.
So they would just build a house right up against the cave entrance.
Yes. These natural formations provided excellent shelter, insulation, and security for the animals.
But wait, why would a grotto or the ground floor be the preferred method over, say, a dedicated separate stable? Wouldn't a cave setting be damp and dark?
That's a great question. It gets to the practicality of the time. First, the lower level or grotto would actually be warmer in the Judean winter than a flimsy wooden shed.
Because of the thermal mass of the earth.
The thermal mass of the earth and rock, exactly. Second, having the animals clothes was essential for security. You wanted them inside the domestic structure. And third, the grotto wasn't seen as some inferior space for an emergency birth. It was a functional part of the home economy.
That dramatically shifts the mental image. It turns the setting from this, clean, romanticized wooden stable into something much more earthy, cool, damp, and certainly less private.
And we have compelling evidence that this cave theory is the older tradition. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, a key pilgrimage site, is built directly over a grotto that has been venerated as the exact birth location since at least the 2nd century AD.
So, centuries before the wooden barn imagery became dominant in Western art.
Centuries before, the early church, closer to the historical event, pointed to the cave.
It truly shows how much the historical setting was later adapted by Western European art and architecture, which preferred the look of a timber stable over a stone grotto.
It's a powerful illustration of cultural transplantation.
Okay, let's move to the last major discrepancy. The date itself. Everyone knows the celebrated date is December 25th.
Mm-hmm.
But we've confirmed the Bible provides absolutely no specific calendar date, season, or time of year. So how did the church settle on December 25th?
This is one of the clearest examples of the early church prioritizing theological symbolism and, political strategy over historical accuracy. The date of December 25th wasn't officially adopted by the church until the mid-4th century.
Under the Roman Emperor Constantine.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is how the early church synthesized its growing calendar with the existing dominant cultural landscape of the Roman Empire.
So there were two primary motivations for picking December 25th.
That's right. Firstly, there was profound theological symbolism. The date aligns almost perfectly with the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere.
The shortest day of the year. The moment of deepest darkness.
After which the light begins to return. So it's a potent symbolic day to celebrate the arrival of Christ, often called the light of the world.
That makes sense theologically.
And secondly, and perhaps more pragmatically, adopting this date helped Christianize major Roman festivals that were already deeply ingrained in the winter cultural calendar. People were already celebrating.
And these weren't small festivals, right? We're talking huge civic celebration.
Absolutely. The two most prominent were Saturnalia, the multi-day winter festival of, revelry and feasting,
Yeah.
and the festival dedicated to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, which was celebrated right around December 25th.
So it was a strategic move. Instead of banning the festivities, which would have been politically disruptive and highly unpopular, the church just overlaid its new major celebration onto the existing holiday slot.
It's a strong theory. It made conversion and acceptance much smoother. It allowed the Christian message to integrate into the existing framework of the Roman year.
However, there's compelling counter-evidence within the biblical text itself that suggests this symbolic date completely misses the mark on the actual season.
There is. That small but powerful piece of counter-evidence is found in the Gospel of Luke. The description of the shepherds living out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night.
That one phrase seems to be the nail in the coffin for late December birth.
It raises a critical question about climate. If you look at the climate of Judea, particularly in the hills around Bethlehem, the winters are often characterized by cold temperatures, heavy rains, and sometimes even snow.
The ground becomes muddy and miserable. So what was the standard practice for sheep during this cold, rainy season?
They were brought under cover. Shepherds would shelter the flocks in enclosed pens, caves, or the lower levels of homes, precisely to protect them from the harsh, wet weather.
So the idea that they would be living out in the fields suggests a much milder time of year.
It has to. It strongly implies a birth during the milder seasons, most likely spring or early autumn, when the weather was conducive to open field grazing.
Which supports the idea that December 25th is a traditional symbolic date chosen for external reasons, not a historical one.
It does. And just to reinforce this, early Christian writers fiercely debated this season. They proposed dates from March all the way through November. Even today, the Eastern Orthodox tradition still rejects the December 25th date, celebrating the Nativity on January 6th or 7th.
It truly underlines how detached the symbolism became from the initial historical event. We've uncovered a calculation error for the year, an architectural confusion for the setting, and a repurposed festival date for the month.
The whole picture shifts once you apply the lens of historical rigor.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, who came here to be well-informed and gain those aha moments? Let's put the three main takeaways together.
Okay. First, the historical time frame for the birth is firmly set between 6 BC and 4 BC, and that's based on the verified death of Herod the Great, documented by the historian Josephus.
And we can thank a 6th century monk's calculation error and the lack of a year zero for all the calendar confusion.
Right. Second, architecturally, you should mentally swap that traditional wooden barn for the more historically probable setting, the lower, sheltered level of a relative's home or a communal cave or grotto used for sheltering animals.
A tradition traceable all the way back to the 2nd century.
And finally, December 25th is a powerful theological and cultural adoption from the 4th century, strategically chosen to align with the winter solstice and integrate major Roman festivals like Sol Invictus.
A decision that's reinforced by the biblical counter-evidence of the shepherds grazing in the fields during a season that just couldn't have been deep winter. It's a powerful lesson in separating profound tradition, which gives us meaning, from rigorous historical evidence, which gives us facts.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. If the early church, centuries later, was so willing to adapt the date and the location to fit the cultural and theological frameworks of the Roman Empire, what does that tell us about their priorities?
That's a great question.
It wasn't that they were ignorant of the details, but that the core importance of the Nativity was focused entirely on the event itself, the incarnation and its transformative theological meaning, rather than the precise historical footnotes of the calendar date or location. You see, the message superseded the marker.
That's a great thought to leave with. The endurance of the meaning, regardless of the historical marker, is what makes this story so powerful. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating borderland between tradition and history.
Keep exploring that space. We'll see you next time.